You're listening to Females in Fantasy, a podcast elevating the voices of women authors of science fiction and fantasy who write about kick-ass heroines. I am your host, Brianna Da Silva, and this is episode 6. And this is also the first time that I am recording one of these intros or outros on a weekday. It feels kind of weird. I mentioned several episodes back that I am in a pretty major life transition. I am leaving my full-time job that I've had for about 3 years. Well, I've only been full-time there for a year and a half, but moving into doing a lot of freelancing and entrepreneurship thingamabobs. So one of the things that is coming out of that is I am allowing myself a little bit more time every week that I can work on this podcast. I'm treating it more like a very part-time job. So this is pretty exciting. Today we are having a conversation with Sarah Elkins. She is a comic writer, artist, and author, and we're going to be talking about asexual representation, character creation, the power of words, and so much more fun stuff. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Sarah Elkins. Welcome, Sarah, to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I am coming off of a migraine, so not so great, but not the worst I've ever been.
That's a very honest question, a very honest answer. I mean, I hope you feel better soon. I know you've been working on that migraine for kind of the better part of this whole day, right?
Yeah, part of yesterday. Yesterday it was coming on and I was like, I hope it's just a sinus headache. And then I went to bed last night and I was like, this is not just a sinus headache, but I already took Tylenol. And then this morning I was like,
Yeah. Bodies sure do like to choose really inconvenient times to be unwell, don't they? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a couple weeks ago, I think it was the flu. I'm not totally sure. It was definitely something like the flu. And that totally wiped me out for about a week, and super annoying. I got behind in a lot of really important tasks. But it is what it is. Okay, so let's actually get into the actual conversation a little bit more. So tell us about yourself and how you got into writing stories and making comics.
My name is Sarah Elkins. I live in Texas. I am an allo-romantic asexual woman. I write comics I write comics and draw comics and write prose. And I primarily write asexual lead characters as well as other queer characters. And I've been writing all my life pretty much and drawing all my life. So
cool.
When I was a kid, I wanted to be a film writer and director. And I also would draw little comics and I'd just write this bizarre Mary Sue filled action adventure film script series that I showed friends and a few family members, and half of it was written in pink jelly pen. And I think I went through 100 some odd pages in rainbow jelly pen when those came out. And it was just this terrible fan insert character fan comic type script thing where there was I'd ask my friends if they wanted a character and they'd say yeah, and their thing would be they really like Dragon Ball Z, so they basically wanted a Super Saiyan. And I'm like, okay, so I put that in. And then I ask a different friend, hey, do you want a character in this story? And their thing was Tenchi Muyo, so they wanted a space pirate. Okay, so I put that in. And I was like, I like Knight Rider, so I'm gonna put in a talking car. And it was just a big mess. Mm-hmm. But it was
pretty much all first stories.
Yeah, it was also the first thing that Neela was in, and she was the main character that was my horrible Mary Sue. And I know some reviewers have said this character's too much of a Mary Sue, but I think for me, I kind of have an odd take on it because she used to be so much worse.
Yeah.
So it's hey guys, you want to see a Mary Sue version of this? I have some pink jelly pin stories for you.
It's always so much fun to look back on like the stories that we wrote when we were kids, where like, it's so easy to be like, oh man, this really sucks. But then it's like, those stories are also really critical too, because when you're a kid and you're not really like criticizing what you're making and you're just having fun like that, I feel like really, like if you're just having a lot of fun, like you're going to be a lot more likely to keep writing and then, keep getting better at it.
I think that feeling is one reason why I've tried so hard to make a story with Neela in it that worked and wasn't just a horrible mashup of anime and 80s TV series that I saw reruns of as a child. So, I tried writing, let's see, 5 or 6 different versions of stories with Neela as a character in it. And I tried different combinations of, okay, I like these aspects of the original character. How can I make these work in a story? Okay, that's too much. That's not going to work. And, oh, well, this version's missing a thing. Oh, well, that version's just turned into its whole different thing, so I'm going to rename the character and do that as something else. And I really, it took me a while to get it to work, and Psychic Underground Facility isn't perfect, but it, to me, still has that sort of personal nostalgia for the character and the sort of feeling that I had as a kid. Like, I could write this character all day, and I could write all the other characters in the story all day, and just not get tired of it.
That's a good sign. Yeah. So Neela, and forgive me because I'm probably forgetting the details, is she the main character in The Facility?
Yes, she is.
Okay, so this is your novel that is coming out, or actually, it has come out now.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, it has.
Yes.
It came out a couple weeks ago, and it's out in print and digital from 9 Star Press.
Awesome. So tell us about that story, and then you've already been talking about the main character, but maybe tell us a little bit more about who she is and ways that you relate to her or don't relate to her, and then also just kind of the story in general.
Okay, so The Facility is about Neela Roddenberry. She's a psychic, and she's had psychic powers her whole life. She's also been plagued by dreams of a past life as Nikola Tesla. And she views the dreams and stuff as sort of personal obsessive thought thing that she really doesn't like about herself. So she tries not to think about it, which only makes it worse. And her family is kind of weird. Her dad's sort of a doomsday prepper. It's touched on in the first book, and so she's familiar with weapons and government conspiracies and stuff. And one day she winds up at the site of a terrorist attack on the road, and her car is about to get crushed, and rather than run away, she just runs towards the chaos because she's thinking, hey, I have psychic powers, and people here don't know what to do in this sort of situation. People are panicking, and she runs towards the chaos, and through the course of events, winds up getting picked up and whisked away to a secret government lab that studies psychics. And then things get worse.
Oops. As they are wont to do when you're in secret government labs.
Yeah. The character is, she's not a very mature character. And the only place she really, works, personally, the only time she halfway knows what she's doing is when something is going terribly bad. So, I'm going to try not to read too many more book reviews because some folks have been like, this character's immature and I don't like her. And I'm like, well, then I did something right. Because she's not supposed to be very mature, and as I wanted her to have somewhere to grow from. And, like, a few people said that she does everything right. And I'm like, no, she doesn't. She does everything wrong. And things get worse because she does the wrong thing.
Reviews are hard, to read. It's
yeah. But that kind of character I find interesting. Because, like, okay, she has psychic abilities, and she's had them her whole life, and she knows how to use them. And she's also been raised by a parent who would say, well, you got to be careful with these powers, or the government might come and take you one day. Or you might need to use them for, like, protection and stuff. And so, like, her undercurrent is that sort of mentality, but she also tries to resist against it. And she's just a mess. And I find it interesting to write her because she doesn't do the right thing. And she does react immaturely a lot. And, like, I just wanted her to kind of have a baseline spot to start from and grow through the series because I have a lot of plans. And
nice.
I've been planning the book series for years, like trying to get it to work. And then once I finally got it to work, I started jotting down a rough outline of where I wanted things to go, how I wanted characters to grow. And I didn't mean to make that rhyme.
I didn't even realize it rhymed until you pointed it out.
Yeah, so I've got some pretty detailed plans and pretty rough plans for character arcs. And I also wanted to include, like, the emotions of the characters and what they're thinking.
Yeah.
And I know some folks see that sort of thing as more of a YA component than just general genre fiction, which strikes me as odd because, I mean, adults have emotions, and there are plenty of adults who are not very mature in their actions.
This is very true.
So why can't characters start out that way and be messes?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to come back to your book again in a little bit. But another thing that you've worked on, as we mentioned before, are comics. And I believe you have two different comics. They're both online, correct? Could you tell us a little bit about them and, like, what they're about and the characters that are in them?
Well, I have one comic at the moment.
Oh,
it's Magic Remains, and it is a dystopian magical girl comic on Tapas.
Oh, fun.
So you can read it on the Tapas app, which is a cell phone app that allows you to read comics, webtoons that are translated from Korean, and then also they have cell phone novels. And I have a cell phone novel on there as well called By the Blade, which is about...
See, I got that confused.
Yeah, By the Blade is about an asexual office worker who... Her hobby is swords, and she's always fantasized about entering, like, a sword tournament or something. Sort of like, hey, this guy in the office is creepy, and I wish I could just fight him in a coliseum rather than deal with his creepy glares at work. And so one day she winds up getting an invitation to enter a sword fighting competition, and things go badly.
Oh, God, that sounds like fun.
Yeah. I wrote it differently than the facility. It was more, it's first-person present tense.
Okay.
So I was hoping it would get the reader kind of invested in, oh my God, this is happening right now to this character. It's sort of a literary device that you can only really see in fiction, I think. Because, like, it just doesn't work otherwise, I guess, unless you're watching somebody live stream something. So, yeah, that was fun to write. It had lots of surreal horror stress dreams that I wrote in there, and lots of violent sword fights. And I know some folks really do not like asexuality linked with death. And I was worried about that while writing the story. because the main character is asexual. But I tried to include in there that she really doesn't like what's going on, and she realizes it's wrong, but it gets to a point where she just has to survive. And I hope people enjoy the story. It's, in my opinion, pretty raw. Magic Remains, my webcomic, is something I started as a recovery project because a couple years ago, the tendons in my arm for my elbow, my lateral epicondyles, ossified, and they pretty much were solid on my right arm, which caused all the muscles to get inflamed and press on the nerve, and then I was not able to hold a pen. And I'm right-handed, and I had worked previously as a flatter colorist assistant and an inker in comics, and I had to stop working on anything and use my left hand until I finally got a doctor to look at my right arm and tell me what was wrong. And then it took me about 1.5 years, almost 2 years, to get the dexterity back in my arm to draw again. And so I managed to get a small job inking a comic called Hero Cats of Stellar City. I inked 2 issues of that while I was recovering. And after that, I really wasn't sure I'd be able to work on a comic on my own and produce pages from beginning to end. So I asked Twitter if they'd be interested in a dystopian magical girl comic. And as Mad Max Fury Road was happening right then, and folks said they really liked that idea, so I decided I would write and draw one as a project to convince myself that I could work on comics again. And I started working on that, and then I got the job doing the Hero Cats comic. So it was sort of concurrent. I realized, hey, I can draw again, it just takes me a while. And I might be able to get paying jobs in comics eventually again. It's just going to take a while, sort of. So, yeah, Magic Remains, sorry I end up going in loops, it's
okay.
It's the story of Melee. She is a magical girl in a dystopian world. And she has a mascot whose name is Frey. And Frey is this bat fox with 3 eyes that flies around and is cute and allows Melee to power up and use her superpowers in this dystopian world. And the first, I guess, issue is about 12 pages, and it was sort of a proof of concept to myself that I could do a comic again.
That's awesome.
And it's got weird spiny dragon things that Melee fights. And after I completed that, I started on writing an actual story arc for it. And I started producing pages for that part last fall. And at the moment, the comic is on hiatus because I am trying to tackle my backlog of commissions. And I also have a standing order for commissions that I'm producing for an author for their book that will be out next fall, I believe. So I'm going to be just up to my eyeballs in commissions and also book rewrites for the next book in the Psychic Underground series for the next few months. So I'm hoping that folks who are subscribed to Magic Remains don't mind the wait. But I do have a script written and thumbnails planned and pages in progress for that comic. It's just going to take a while before I can get back to it.
So I should have probably brought this up earlier in the interview, but there may be some listeners who haven't heard the term ace or asexual, which is what it's short for, or alloromantic, or maybe they just kind of know what it is, but they don't necessarily understand what those terms mean. So would you mind giving us like a definition for what those two terms mean and how they differ?
I don't mind at all. Alloromantic means that I experience romantic attraction as opposed to aromantic, where someone does not experience romantic attraction. Asexual means I do not experience sexual attraction or sexual desire the way that sexual folks do. So as an alloromantic asexual, I do experience romantic attraction and desire, but I don't experience the sexual component of attraction.
Okay. And what are some common misconceptions or myths that you think people might have about asexual people? And what are some ways that storytelling can help fix this in the like cultural consciousness, if that makes sense?
Oh, that makes sense. There's this weird duality I've seen from some folks, even within the queer community, regarding asexual people. And they seem to think that aces are somehow robotic and yet somehow animalistic at the same time. And that doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
It's extra weird to me, the robot part, because in fiction, robots get sexualized or romanticized even. Like, if you look at Data in Star Trek, he's an android, and they have like this whole long story arc with him and sex. And there's tied into that is the idea that people think sex is required to be human, which I think might be how they get to the idea that people are asexuals are animalistic. But I had a cat who was ace, which is, I did not know the term asexual at the time, but I did have a cat who, she did not like any other cat's advances at all. So I used to call her a little kitty combat nun, because I did not know growing up as a kid the term asexual. The closest I knew was celibacy, and I knew nuns were supposed to be celibate. And it's sort of a weird thing to hear people say, oh, well, aces aren't people or something, or they aren't human or whatever, because they don't experience sexual desire or sexual attraction or whatever. I'm like, there's a lot more to humanity than sex.
Absolutely.
And
it's weird. It's like people just can't wrap their mind around it for some reason. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's similar to how cis heterosexual people can't seem to understand gay folks or bi folks or trans folks. They just can't grok that idea that this person is not defined by this other thing. And because their only reference point is themselves.
Right.
And I try to read about other folks so I can have a better understanding of them. And like, if I don't get it right away, I'll read more. So it's sort of weird. Trying to think of some other misconceptions. There's the asexuals are cold and unfeeling, which is also weird because all the aces I know are super loving and outgoing and excited, and some of them are angry, and some of them are happy, and some of them are sad. It depends on the day because they're people. And like, all human emotions are not tied to sex.
Exactly.
And just as all human emotions are not tied to romance.
And I feel like one of the things that's great about storytelling too is that when we're putting ourselves in the shoes of a fictional character who is different from us, it can help us to kind of overcome some of those some of those blockers in our mind where it's like, oh, I can't imagine what it would be like, to not experience sexual attraction, or I can't imagine what it would be like to, not identify as, the gender that I was assigned, or, something like that. Like people, if they can't wrap their mind around it, sometimes just being able to identify with a character that they see this character's full humanity, and all of their emotions and their desires and their memories and their fears. And then I feel like that can really help a lot sometimes. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why, like, gay acceptance, for example, has improved. It's largely been because of the stories and the television and movies. But we need to do a lot better. And like asexual representation is one thing that we don't have hardly anything for that.
One hurdle that I noticed last year, or actually the year before last, was the lack of a definition in the Webster's Dictionary of asexuality beyond the old scientific term about plant and animal reproduction. And I and some other folks on Twitter had asked Merriam-Webster about that, and because Merriam-Webster's Twitter account is pretty active at responding to folks. And last year, in the spring, they said, oh, well, we don't have any examples of meaningful use of the term in that context.
Oh,
so people started sending them examples of the word being used. And they're like, well, it needs to be in printed, edited text. So people sent them lots of examples of it in printed, edited text, and novels and books and stuff. And we just kept pushing. And then last fall, or I guess it was last summer, they release a list of words that they've added, like, quarterly. And so we were pressing them, and they released the next list of words they had added, and they had not added asexuality. So I created a petition on change.org for them to add asexual as an orientation, aromantic, and agender to the dictionary, because those three A's get left out a lot, even within the queer community. So it's got almost 5,000 signatures, I think. And I contacted them, and they said they would not they were not in the process of notifying people about updating words as they update them. And so basically they're like, we might look into this, but we're not going to tell you when we add it. So I've been checking every week since then, just about, to see when they add words. And they have updated the entry for asexuality to include the orientation. They did that, I think, last November. And then just last month, they added agender to the dictionary.
That's so amazing to hear.
They have yet to add aromantic, and I am really hopeful that they'll add aromantic. And then I'm hopeful that this will get them to look into adding other words, because, like, there's so many other people who are of these different marginalized identities who don't have their words in the dictionary. And then some folks say, well, you're not in the dictionary, so you're not real.
Which is so arbitrary, because all dictionaries are representations of the words that we're actually using, right? It's just someone writing down language. Like, a dictionary isn't the law. It doesn't define it. Like, when we think about it that way, what's in the dictionary?
Yeah.
That's not how language works. Like, words mean, like, what we use them to mean. And if we're using a word, then it's a word. And there's plenty of these words for people's identities that are totally being used in conversation and in lots of communities. So
whenever I was making the petition, I got irritated at the list of words they had released right before I made the petition, because I was looking through it, and they had some, like, notation or something in an article about little known words that were already in the dictionary and had been, like axeromancy, I think is the word, which is a form of divination with the use of axes.
What the heck?
And I was like, when was that used? When is that used meaningfully in printed, edited text? I know people who write action, adventure, fantasy novels, and none of them have written anything about axeromancy. So...
yeah. Interesting choice of priorities.
Yeah. And like, looking it up, I saw somebody say something about it was in the Bible or something, and I was like, I'm pretty sure they didn't refer to whatever that was as axeromancy in the Bible.
Probably not. Some weird translation somewhere.
Yeah, it's like, hey guys, this is weird. Like, they can keep that word in the dictionary. I was just thinking, there's some other words that impact people's lives now, day to day.
Yeah.
That could really go in there and help folks.
That's a great step, though. I love hearing that story and how you've been able to help make a dent, and I think it's a really important step in making people more aware of these lesser known identities.
Mm-hmm. So I hope it has been helping.
I think it is, because even though, like, I will be always like a purist, and when it comes to I don't know if that's the right word, but when it comes to like linguistics, I get really opinionated about, like, because there's so many people have so many like misconceptions about how language works.
It's always changing.
Like, it's always changing. Or someone's like, you just made up a word. It's like,
how do you think words happen?
That every single word in existence in every single language was made up at some point. Anyway, so I think that's important, because even though, like, some people still think that, most people think that way. They're like, if it's in the dictionary, then that means it's real. Mm-hmm. Even though it's just human beings writing things in the dictionary, so it's arbitrary. But it does impact the way people are thinking.
Yeah, and if language didn't change, we would all be speaking like Old English and High German, and even then, it would have to go even further back. It's just, language changes, and new words are invented so you can understand concepts that people didn't quite have a grasp on before.
Right. If we have a new concept that we're talking about and none of our previous words work to describe it, then we can use a new word, or we can adapt an old word, like asexual, had it have a meaning, like in biology or whatever, and then we're like, hey, let's use this word because it also works really well for this other concept that we're describing.
It's like atheist is a person who is without religion, and asexual is a person who is without sexual desire.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm probably messing things up this whole time, and I'm sorry. I still am coming off a migraine.
You're doing just fine.
I'm wearing sunglasses in a dark room, and I have my eyes shut most of this interview.
Okay. Well, let's wrap this up. I want to just ask you one more question.
All right.
If you could change just one thing in the publishing industry or in the reading community to make it more inclusive to ace people, what would it be? I know it's kind of a weighty question, but what's like something that just comes to mind?
I think I'd like to change the mentality that a character has to have a certain orientation for a plot-related reason. Because, I noticed one reviewer liked my book because the character's ace, but the book is not about her being ace. It comes up in the book, but it's just how, like, other people's orientations come up in their life. And so, like, the book is this thriller, horror, adventure, super thing, and it just happens to have an ace lead character and other queer characters, and it's not just about her being ace. And I've seen other folks say, oh, well, why does this character have to be gay? Well, why does that character have to be straight? Do you ever think
Exactly.
that? That shouldn't be a question that someone is asking, because it shouldn't have to be plot relevant. And there's still an idea that I've seen in publishing, even in comics, that, oh, well, that character, why did you make that character a gay woman? Or why did you make that character ace? Like, because I wanted to write an ace character kicking butt? Like, there's...
That's plenty of reason.
I've had to identify with cis straight guys in movies and cis straight women in movies. And, like, I've always thought, hey, it would be cool if there was this action-adventure movie, or action-adventure story, but the main character was more like me, or more like my trans friends or something. So, like, it shouldn't have to be plot relevant.
Full agree. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So how can people find you, find your book, etc.?
I'm on Twitter as Neila K20, Neila, capital K, 20. My book is available on Amazon from 9 Star Press. It's also available on barnesandnoble.com and 9 Star Press's website. My webcomic, I should say, that's the facility, is available from 9 Star Press.
Yes.
My book, By the Blade, a cell phone novel, and my webcomic, Magic Remains, are available on Tapas, on the Tapas app. And, I'm trying to get back into using other social media. So I do have a Facebook page, as Sarah, and then in quotations, Neila Elkins. I used the character's name as my web handle for years, since I was in middle school. So I have some friends who know like 15 different Sarahs who just call me Neila because of that. And whenever I was shopping the book around, I was like, if this gets picked up, this is going to be kind of messy. But hopefully people will be able to distinguish that I'm a different person.
I think it makes sense. It's like, hey, you're using the name of your character. Like,
yeah.
Writers, we like to use our character names. We're proud of them.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
And, like, I don't have nearly the problems that Neila in the book has. I have a whole different set of problems.
I believe you. All right. Well, thank you again, and I hope you feel better soon.
Oh, thank you so much. And I've had a fun time, and I hope I haven't rambled too much.
It's all good. It's all good. All right. Talk to you later.
All right. Talk to you later as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. That was my conversation with Sarah Elkins. If you want to keep in touch, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at Females In, and that's the letter N, Fantasy, where I have a Twitter chat every fourth Saturday of the month. So that now is like an official repeating time, so it'll be easier for people to remember. You can also drop me a line at femalesinfantasy@gmail.com. I want to give a shout out to Mireille Gash, who illustrated the character for the logo, and also to the good folks over at Music Radio Creative, who do the editing for these podcasts, who have been really awesome working with me, especially when I have been not so awesome lately, and getting files to them at a good time. So they are pretty amazing, by the way. I also want to give a big thank you to my supporters at Patreon, or co-creators as I call them. If you want to support the show and actually help create it with me, essentially, head on over to patreon.com/femalesinfantasy, where you will have the opportunity to submit questions for me to ask my guests. And also, you'll get some extra goodies like additional conversations with every single guest that I have on. A little preview for next time, I'm going to have Justina Ireland on the podcast to talk about her latest book, Dread Nation, which is a epic ride, I have to tell you. It's, in my opinion, maybe one of the best things that's happened to YA literature this year. So you definitely need to read it, and you definitely need to listen to this conversation with her in 2 weeks. Until then, this has been Females in Fantasy. I am Brianna Da Silva. Thanks for listening.